Welcome to the More Than More podcast, where we discuss building meaningful, impactful businesses, careers, and lives through real estate.
I'm going to jump right in here. I got a question for you to kick it off.
Okay.
Really, two questions.
All right.
The first, and I hope this makes sense, you know where we're going today.
I do.
When did you figure out that you were not normal?
This is probably no joke. It was probably about first or second grade. And I would see that looking around the room. I'm like, oh, I don't think and function in the same way as some of the other kids in this room. So it was early on.
This was about competition. This was about, what was the context?
I think it was a higher level of a standard of wait a minute, I get that you're thinking that's acceptable work, but even in first and second grade, I'm like, that's not acceptable. That's the bare minimum. And so I think by that point already, I'm like, I think differently. And then all of a sudden it just kept compounding. And you see that really, so it was early on.
And you must, I think I'm coming to terms in my old age here with I think I developed late in terms of my self-awareness and emotional intelligence, because I don't think I realized what does that look like for a second grader? What do you do with that?
It honestly became creating my own challenges sometimes in a classroom, and it was
because you weren't challenged enough,
right? And then creating a relationship, and this was all the way through even high school and college, where I would find ways to make it harder in the classroom.
Wow.
And so it just became a thing of well, what can I do to make today a little more exciting? And that became a thing. I'm, like I said, young and all the way through. And even today, what can we do to make today just a little more exciting than yesterday?
Create trouble.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay,
Stir the pot.
Next question. Yeah. And this is, I think, where I want to go later on in this conversation, get a little real. But what would you say your driving force to excel has been?
Had time to think about this, obviously, because I knew where we were going today. The driving force has literally been people-pleasing. And we're going to get into this in a little bit, because at the beginning, that drive of people-pleasing was a negative. And it's become a very different thing now as I become more aware of what that means.
People-pleasing parents, people-pleasing high expectations from, or you just wanted, because that second grader, it sounds like it was an internal drive, but it was about needing acceptance or acknowledgement from the world?
Recognition, acknowledgement, but then also seeing that, hey, wait a minute, when you go above and beyond, people recognize it and say something about it. So you have to continually raise that bar. And so, but it's changed, because I think it was a negative for a big part of my life, and I think we'll get into this soon, and I think we'll have a good discussion on this.
Love it. So hi, I'm Dylan.
I'm Travis.
And we're jumping into maybe a little mini-series that we're going to be doing here. This first section, so first of all, we were covering a book. Gino Wickman wrote this, Shine. Gino Wickman's the guy that put together Traction, which is the EOS operating system that our organization runs on. He wrote several others, Rocket Fuel, but a guy that's coached just hundreds of thousands of the top entrepreneurs around.
And started as a real
world.
estate coach, which is unique in itself with his parents. His dad had a real estate coaching company, and
Dad was Floyd Wickman.
Yeah.
Did you
no,
consume Floyd Wickman
I did
stuff?
not know, and that's what's interesting is I actually knew of Gino Wickman and didn't even realize that he had a background in real estate. So that made it even more interesting of what he's created.
I knew them independently. I had no idea that it was his dad.
Yeah.
Floyd Wickman was V8, not VHS. Yeah, it was V8. I think it was DVDs. I think I had a DVD set, and I worked for hours and hours and hours through his scripting. He was a genius with that. So son of Floyd Wickman, former real estate script guru.
Mm-hmm.
And his story is beside the point. You can read about that in the book, but ultimately his expertise is that he's got as much face time with entrepreneurs around the world as anybody else. And we've certainly benefited from Gino's wisdom through Traction in how we've grown our organization. And so, where are we going to go? We're just going to be, you and I are really just going to kick this off today, talking about the first half of the book. It's really two major sections. The introduction of it, Next several weeks is doing one-on-ones with a whole bunch of our agents and team members digging through a bunch of these disciplines.
Which is so exciting to be able to hear all these different voices and relate it back to personal lives. I think this is going to be very influential.
I think it's been a lot of fun. And right now we know we got a lot of people actually reading the book inside the
Yes.
organization. It's excited to see that. What I said, because you taught about this, you taught the concept at Round Table, and I'm 3 times through this now. And what I keep saying to everyone reading it is I think for a lot of you, you're going to read a very simple book.
Yep.
And you're going to go, yeah, that makes sense. It was simple. And for me, what I've recognized in looking back at this is how profound most of what he's saying is, and how much my life journey has mirrored what he's saying here.
Yeah. And I think that was exactly what you just said. The first time I listened to this, I'm like, you know what? Nothing really profound here. It's fine. Right. I'm like, this is good, but is there really anything that I've never heard before? And then once I actually read it, had it in my hands, and I'm going through the pages and I'm making little scribbles and I'm dog-earing some pages, I'm like, okay, this is different.
The 3 discoveries. And then what I'm going to be doing over the next...
And so even on the drive here, I re-listened to kind of some of the introduction of just reminding myself. And as you start to go through this, he's not talking in a language that's scientific and unapproachable. Like, this is real life, and it makes it so easy to consume.
I think some of the simplest stuff is sometimes the most profound. And what that does is it makes it easy to overlook.
Right.
And I think that's why we're doing what we're doing, because I don't want to overlook these ideas. Let's start with, and just disclosure, we don't want to do a book club here. So even these 10 conversations that I'm planning to have on the 10 disciplines, really not going to focus much on the book, just using those 10 disciplines as
the prompts.
Launch pads.
Yeah. Yep.
To talk about different contexts of our growth journeys. But today is a little book clubby in that we're going to actually dig into some of that first half of the book on the 3 discoveries. But before we go there, can we start with this outer world, inner world thing?
Absolutely.
And we didn't really prep much for this.
Which I think is good, right?
I think so too. This will be pretty authentic. What I want to do though, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read literally the first paragraph. Yeah. Finding your true self. This is very brief. Most driven entrepreneurs I know demonstrate an intense passion for their vision, along with a relentless commitment to success. This intensity is a powerful contributor to business triumphs, but it often comes from a dark source, such as childhood trauma, past wounding, fear, depression, or anxiety. And as a result, many entrepreneurs achieve significant business success only to find inner satisfaction elusive. The darkness that drove them to achieve so much never seems to go away. I think that's where I want to kick off this outer world, inner world reality. Maybe help me with do you have a definition, or can you explain outer world, inner world?
Yeah, what's the persona? When people look at you, they see you. What is it that they're imagining your world is? And so again, they've looked at you, they've made some assumptions, and they have an idea. But the bigger piece of this is we know that internally we have a very different story that we're not actually even putting out to the public. And I think that's a very important part of this book, but also in these discoveries at the beginning, is that there is something for especially that 10% of the population that is wildly driven, the entrepreneurs. There is something that led them to where they are now. And most of the time, and it's what they talk about here, is it's not always a positive thing that drove them to be different, to be driven. And it's taking that and realizing you can have peace with it, I think, is what we'll get to here in just a little bit.
Which is the thesis, right?
Yeah.
So outer world is what the world gets to see. It's our success and our titles and our awards. I think of it as the front stage. Mm-hmm. It's what's visible, and it's what we get recognized for as driven, successful, accomplished individuals.
Yeah.
What he's suggesting, and I think has been super true for me, and I think I'm just going to share some stuff about my personal journey. I'm not sure if you want to as well. Yep. Is that underneath what looks like super success is I picture it. I either think of a little child, a little boy, frantically just trying to find peace and acceptance and whatever that contentment maybe is the word. But I also like to picture the duck's feet. It's like this smooth moving, but these
going like crazy,
furious. anxious turmoil is the word that he uses. There's an inner, your outer world success, but inner world turmoil, the anxiety, dissatisfaction, and then scarcity mindedness is how I think of that. What I wrote down here, because I thought this was pretty profound. Sometimes it's our inner turmoil, and I think you just said this, that drives us towards our initial success.
Right.
It's kind of this dark motivator. But it doesn't have to be the case. It's possible to have success and find peace. So do I put you on the spot, or why don't I start?
You go. Yeah.
I'm gonna share just my personal version of this. And I think he shared his, and I think his co-author shared theirs as well. And I think it's pretty impactful to hear this from people. And it starts with maybe my outer world, which is what people here know me for. I've been pretty vulnerable with a lot of our staff, and so some of them know a little about my inner world. But my outer world, so I came here as a swimmer. I was a college athlete, recruited from South Africa, came across the world to get a full ride, and had a lot of success. I actually have 2 world titles. I don't know if
I did not know this. This is what's going to be really interesting through this conversation. Is I think there's staff members that know this is all going to be new to me. So I'm intrigued by this because this is all going to be new information.
2 world titles actually was in surf lifesaving. This is 97, New Zealand. I've got multiple national titles. I'm a several-time All-American here. And really probably could have or maybe should have gone to the Olympics. In 2004, the 4x100 relay team from South Africa, that I would have been on that relay team if I'd gone back home and won the Olympic gold. Now,
really,
it was crazy. It never should have happened, but they beat the Americans and the Australians, and those guys are famous now, and I think it's amazing and super cool. But I was a very successful swimmer. I then gave that up and started real estate and started a family. And I've got a pretty awesome family. I got 2 super successful kids. I've got we just have a great crew, and we've been very intentional about it. We love our family. We get to travel. We get to do cool things. And the outside world gets to see our Instagram reels. Right. And I have all sorts of people saying, man, we wish we could go all the places you get to go. And I recently had someone come up to us and say, man, we desire to have our children be as close to us as yours are with you. Right. And I was very profoundly
big compliment.
Because it's what I've intentionally worked to do. So I was a successful athlete. I've got a great family, and I have several businesses. I own several real estate businesses. They're growing. They're great. We have an amazing crew. We have, I earn more money than I ever thought I would. Right. Like we have a lot of real estate investments. We've bought real estate over the years intentionally and systematically. And from the outside world perspective, I am crushing it. And in many ways, I really am. We're winning on the business side. I get to coach people. I get to coach people crushing it in the real estate world, who are doing amazing things. And when they're at their worst moments, they come to me for guidance. I'm not a guru, but I'm the last line of defense for people when they've got their biggest challenges. And these are people that are some of the most successful real estate agents in the nation. Yeah. And I get to be their coach. I stand up in front of crowds of hundreds and hundreds of people. I have been successful in my investments. I've been very intentional about building my portfolio, not just real estate, but other investments. And I also run several nonprofits. We have done amazing work. And I just got back from a conference in Colorado where we got to, there's multiple churches that sponsor Care Points, and they have one Care Point. This is churches of thousands or tens of thousands of people. They have a Care Point with 200 or 300 kids, and they're at this conference to compare notes of what they're doing. And then they find out about Jen and I and what we've done with Joe and through this company. And they go, wait, you have 3 Care Points? And you have you've raised over $2.5 million over this period of time for these Care Points. And they're like, how do you do this? And so all of that sounds very braggadocious. It's not.
When again, that's your outer world story.
It is the story.
That's the story.
And then here's the inner world reality. The inner world reality for me, and there's so many places I can go here, but let's start with swimming. When I realized I wasn't normal, was when I looked back on my swimming career and I realized that in every single race that I swam for years and years and years, being a national champion, an all-time America, whatever, I can name one time that I actually celebrated or was happy with my outcome. One time that I go, that was good. Every single other time, I was not satisfied with what I accomplished. The truth is I came from a troubled family and things weren't always like safe at home. My dad and I had relational problems and sometimes that got physical. And so I grew up as a kind of troubled teen with a lot of I wasn't like, home didn't feel safe. Yeah. And part of the reason I came to America was, and this sounds terrible, I love my family, I love my dad, I love my mom, but I fled my home country.
As an escape,
to come somewhere else where I could start my own thing and build my own world. The truth is that throughout my whole life journey, I've struggled with friends because I've always just been so driven and different and kind of doing my own thing. And I've always felt, and I'm an 8, and 8's, like our story's about trust and betrayal. And so I've been betrayed so many times by people. And so I'm fearful of making friends. And so all through this, I'm constantly looking around me as I'm building businesses and recruiting agents, and I'm constantly terrified of being betrayed by the people closest to me. I don't want to let people in. And so all these relationships that I get to coach people and guide them and provide growth, the truth is underneath all that is this fear-based and I get to, and people want to hear what I have to say. I'm terrified that things are going to go south. I'm always afraid of what's going wrong or what could go wrong. I'm constantly in a fear-based mode there. Here's a confession. I almost always, you notice I fist bump a lot?
Yeah.
I get sweaty palms in social settings. I am just awkwardly anxious. Anytime. If it's just me and 3 people I know, no problems. You put me at team meetings, round tables, award banquets. Oh my God. I am so socially anxious inside. And I've wrestled with that my whole life. Yeah. So I just fist bump people.
Yeah, there we go.
Now everybody knows why I do that. I told you I was going to get...
Well, the good news is I always thought it was just a germ thing. So this is even better.
It's not a germ
there we
thing.
Go.
I actually don't care about your germs. I will pick up your French fry off the floor and eat it, but I don't want to shake your hand.
But you don't want to shake my hand.
Because I'm actually socially anxious, and the more I think about it, the more sweaty my
happen.
palms get. And, I'm going to tell one more story here. All of this matters because... I think it was 2018. I don't know the year exactly, but it had been a rough year and it'd been a rough market and we'd had some things go on with agents. And one day I pulled up outside the Urbandale office and I don't know why I was there, but I was there to work. And I sat in the parking lot and I kind of just froze. And this is the weirdest thing, but I could not get myself to go into the office. I just sat in the car. And then I'm like, this is so awkward. What is going on? And so I actually drove across the road to the bank and I parked in the bank parking lot. And I sat there for the better part of 2 hours, staring out the window, just feeling completely and utterly frozen. And I just could not get myself to go into work. And so that moment created a series of events where I was like, okay, crap, what is going on? So I'm like, let me just go talk to one of these crazy people that think that they can counsel people. Went and saw a therapist, hated them. So found another one and actually liked her. Her name was Valerie, super smart lady. And long story short, here's what I learned. I learned that my childhood, that some of my fear and my safety concerns created in me hypervigilance. I'm a hypervigilant individual. I see things people don't see. I'm constantly thinking about all the things that could go wrong and I'm on it. My frontal lobe is firing at 1,000,000 miles an hour at all times. And it's actually what makes me so good at things. I am just super alert. Yeah. And here's the problem with that. When you're constantly hyper alert and your brain is constantly looking for all the tigers that could jump out of bushes, most of the bushes don't have tigers in them. So when small things go wrong, like an agent chooses to leave our company, to me, my body, that's like being chased by a tiger and I'm about to die. And this is true for all of us. Long story short, years and years and years of being chased by tigers had resulted in what they would call cognitive fatigue. My brain was just spent, totally worn out. And she put in front of me a little piece of paper. It was a scale of depression. And I took the piece of paper and I'm like, why would you show me that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm here to talk about my childhood problems. She goes, just look at the paper. And as I looked at it, I realized that where I'd found myself is in a form of mild depression as a function of just being worn the heck out, because I've constantly been running around with a fear-based energy to solve all the problems of the world. And that's where we're going today. But that is my outer world and inner world. The truth is that as for all the things I've accomplished, the inner Dylan is constantly spinning his wheels. And so that's my inner and outer world. And I think that's why this book is so powerful for me, because I believe, and the last several years, I've made so much progress since those meetings on working to create an environment, really through a lot of these 10 habits, to produce inner peace. Is that too much?
No, it's not.
What do you say to all that?
I think it's really interesting, and it comes back to what we've already alluded to, but in some capacity, every one of us is damaged in some way. And that's the thing, is it kicks off the book, and the author's like, you know what, I was sexually abused as a young child. And someone's like, oh man, like, yeah, that's really bad, and your life's really, really been rough because of that. I understand. But what we forget is each one of us has dealt with something that in turn, if we look back, we're like, wow, you know what, that did maybe have more of an impact on my future and how I acted and how I interacted than I would have thought. And I think that's a big piece of this.
You don't realize it till you're older.
You don't, and that's the thing, is there has to be some introspection there. But every one of us has something like that once we spend some time, and whether it's talking to a therapist or it's journaling, you start to realize, like, yep, there is something that is damaged in me. Doesn't mean I'm ruined, doesn't mean I'm broken, but there is something that has had an effect on me. And until we acknowledge that, it's really tough to overcome it.
I've learned to tell that story to people close to me, staff, people on our leadership team, about seeing a therapist, and others as well. When I've shared that story with some, because I think people need to know that it's okay, to be a little broken and to go and find help. Yeah. So, and
just to talk it through, and so my outer world story, I was, like I said, I was people pleaser. I was in the early years, like that teacher's pet, more because I realized, like, the recognition was great, but I also realized pretty early on that when I excelled and did better than anybody else and then pushed to do more, you also get what you want. And when people are really happy with you, you get treated differently and you get treated better. And so all of a sudden it kind of became a thing of like, wow, if I can get everybody to like me, then my life's going to be easier. And at the same time, as I was learning all this and maturing, my parents got a divorce when I was in sixth grade, which, it's common, right? Like half of marriages in the United States do that. And so there's nothing unique there. But when we talk about what is that damage, like that has an effect. And so even though it wasn't one of those, oh my gosh, like this is the worst thing that could have happened to me, it still had a negative effect on me that would continue on for a really long time. And my parents, great parents, I have wonderful parents, and I was loved, but there became a difference. And when we talk about that, everybody seeks love. That's part of just what we need as human beings. I think there's a different piece of that is about being needed and being wanted. Yep. And that's different than being loved. And I think that's, after my parents' divorce, that was the part that I was constantly seeking, was like, wait a minute, I know I'm loved, but I want to be needed and wanted. And so, I was the valedictorian, and then I went to college and I gave our commencement address, and I was, back in high school as our student body president. I was constantly doing everything I could to gain that recognition. So people were like, oh, yep, we need this guy. And so getting involved in organizations in college so that I could be that guy that, like, yep, and so ended up being the executive director of a pretty big not-for-profit at the University of Iowa. And it wasn't that I was probably the best person for it, but I did what I always had done, is I'm like, you know what, I'm going to make people happy. I'm going to do what they need me to do so that their life's better. And when it is, then my life's going to be better in return. And so that was the outer world was like, of course, I'm going to be involved in all these things because I love being involved and I love helping people. There was also that other side of it, is I'm going to be involved because then I'm going to feel wanted and needed. And that's the approach of when you do what people need you to do, when you're people pleasing and they need you, they want you, all of a sudden you feel that extra little bit of, okay, I have self-worth. And that was a big thing. And so when it comes to, that therapist, that same thing, when I, had that conversation of like, the biggest part of it is if I wasn't doing all of this stuff, would I still be needed? Would I still be wanted? And they're like, well, absolutely. You're doing what you want to do because you think there's an end to this kind of process. This is a journey that lasts forever. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we've had really good conversations about there's nothing wrong with wanting to be a people pleaser. And we'll kind of get into this. That's where I found my peace, is that it's the approach to it of thinking that I have to versus, no, this isn't a have to, it's I actually want to.
Well, it's when you think that your self-worth is connected
to other people's happiness. Yep. And we'll get to that here, I think, in a minute. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's cool. Appreciate the honesty. Some of that sounds a lot like a 3 when you were talking about that, finding your self-worth in other people's perspective of you. That sounds a lot like when I read 3 Enneagram. That's their sort of inner passion.
In a piece of it.
Are you a 3?
7.
You're a 7. Yep. You've got to have some 3 in
I've got to have 3. And that's, yes. But you know this too, like, I hate confrontation, and you're well aware of this, and you kind of joke with me every once in a while.
Because you don't want to...
Because I know somebody's going to be upset based on what I have to do. I love win-win situations, and it's really interesting, and we'll get to it here, I think, really shortly, but there are some people that absolutely hate to lose. Like, I'm fine losing, but I love winning. Like, I love to win, and there's other people that absolutely hate losing. And
that's me.
Yeah, yep, and there's a lot of those people. I love winning, and for me... right? If you're going to win and you're going to be happy, that's what I want to figure out, is how do I help you win? But it's a different approach of, okay, I've got to give up what's going to make me happy so that you're happy. It's a different approach, and that's where we've kind of, again, we'll get in this third discovery soon, but it's a different mindset that I think is really important.
So let's get there.
Yeah, I think we should.
So the first half of the book is about these 3 discoveries that are really the outcome that we're looking for. Mm-hmm. If these 10 habits that we're going to explore are mechanisms or habits to form in order to rewire things, rewire your environment, and rewire your MO in order to create peace. Yeah. These 3 discoveries are, I guess the way he describes it, is where we're trying to land. He's beginning with the end in mind.
It's the end product. I think the easiest way to simplify this is, we've got these ingredients, we've got this recipe, we've got these ingredients, and they're actually giving us the finished product first and saying, this is what you can have. Now follow this recipe, put these ingredients in, and it's going to happen. And that's what was unique in reading this, is normally they'll say, okay, here are all the ingredients, and once you put those into the pot, here's what's going to happen. Yeah. And Wickman instead says, no, we're going to talk about all these amazing things that can happen, and this is why you're going to want to go do all these other things.
So discovery number 1, we've said it several times now, you are driven. Yeah. And I think that's what I mean when I ask the question, when did you realize you were normal? Both you and I, but also most of the entrepreneurs that we surround ourselves with, and I would say a lot of our staff as well, are not normal in that they are hyper-driven in a way that they look at their peers. I mean, that's how it manifests in me. I look around me and I'm like, how do you not see that that's not good enough? Or how do you not want more? Or how do you, so how do you maybe help me with your understanding of you are driven?
Yep. And I think, we've talked Enneagram. I'm obviously a huge fan of Clifton Strengths. And I think that if we talk about the competition piece of this, there's the internal competition of I'm every day trying to improve myself and be better than I was. And at the same time, I'm looking at everyone else and saying, and I'm also trying to be better than you. And that's the driven piece of this, is there's no level of content. And I think that's what's really unique in entrepreneurs and the people within our walls, is they can have an amazing year and they look at that and they're like, oh yeah, but I could have done better. And that's what I think the unique part about driven is we are driven, because most people outside of that 10% that's wildly different would say, hey, you know what? I did a good job today, right? I did my 9-to-5 job and I did a solid job at it. And that was a good day. And people that are driven are looking at that at the end of the day saying, I could have done so much more. And that, again, is what drives them to be so successful. It can also be what drives them to be worn out and exhausted.
Did you get into the I don't know if you did any more research. I started looking into the whole dopamine receptor thing.
The mutation on it's okay.
Above my pay grade, right?
Yeah, but it's interesting.
But I think I understand the gist of it. You want to explain that?
Yeah, so there is literally it's a sciencey part of this book, and there's not a whole lot of science in it, but it was really unique that in the D2 and the D4, those receptors, in this small percentage of the population, there's a mutation that it really drives you. In order to gain happiness, you have to do more, and more, which is very unique, because most people, they find their happiness out of accomplishing tasks. And I had 5 things I needed to do today, and I did those 5 things. Kind of like I said, that was a good day. those of us with this mutation look at that and like, we want more, and we're always wanting more than what we did in that given day, in that given year, in that given decade. It's always, what more can I do, because I want more.
Ultimately, because your dopamine, where you're supposed to be realizing or experiencing that dopamine hit,
that happiness should be.
You're almost stifled and stunted, and so you're not actually receiving that.
Doesn't hit it the same way.
Which, did you watch Free Solo?
I have not, but
oh my gosh.
Some people were talking about it. I don't remember where I was. This was just last week. Some people were talking about it.
Well, it's similar in that this guy, he's obviously not right.
Yeah.
I mean, he's amazing what he does. He climbs up the face of this mountain with no gear. But what they study is amygdala. They study his brain, and they run these neural patterns, and they realize that where normal human beings experience fear in things that they're supposed to feel fear about, his amygdala is basically like stunted, and he just doesn't actually feel fear.
Yeah.
So that's why he can climb up mountains like that. In the same way, his brain doesn't experience normal human fear. Mm-hmm. Entrepreneurs and the uniquely driven, don't experience what they ought to experience in normal amounts of gratification.
Right.
The normal dopamine hits that they're supposed to get that go, oh, that was good.
Yeah.
They get, and it's just never quite enough. Mm-hmm. And so does that resonate in terms of what you feel like your journey has
always
been?
Yeah. And that's the thing is where everybody else would have been content with, that A, and I'm like, well, why wasn't it an A+, right? Yeah. And then it's, all right, like, you know what, we've got a solid real estate business. Well, then we need to open 2 or 3 more offices to make it even bigger. And it's, you've dealt with me, as especially being a quick start and an activator of, I'm like, all right, well, if you really want me in the next couple of years to make sure we have offices in Cedar Rapids and Iowa City and Dubuque, I'm going to try to do those this year so that we can look at other offices in those other years. And so it's just that constant
chase.
And it's the thrill of, okay, this was what was expected. I want to go way above and beyond that. And even when I get there, you still want more. And that's what an entrepreneur does. And it's why our people are constantly pushing themselves. But also at the same time, it's that dark side of it of, am I good enough, and am I doing enough? And are people looking at me and saying, wow, they had a good year, but maybe they could have had a better year, or they weren't the best. That's the part of this that gets a little dark and gets a little negative.
Dark's a big word, but it's a word. It's
real.
Once you start to think it through, it actually is dark. You are driven is the first discovery. The idea here is that it's both a blessing and a curse, which is what I'm hearing you talk through. I certainly wouldn't trade being driven the way I am for anything, but I have to come to terms with the fact that not everyone is driven this way. Part of why I'm driven this way might be coming from a dark place, which is our second discovery. And that what my drivenness allows me to do is to have a larger impact. I can probably accomplish more than some people because I'm never going to give up. And I can do bigger things in the world, and I can accomplish amazing things, and I can have 3 care points rather than 1.
Yeah.
But there's a cost. And the cost is that in the process of never being satisfied and constantly driving towards more, there's damage that you can cause both to yourself and to those around you.
Yeah.
Family, even
coworkers, friends.
That.
Yeah. Yep.
So is there anything more? All of this relates to me to the idea that we've always taught about rugged individuals. What we do is we're in real estate. We hire rugged individuals. I don't want a job. I want to like carve my own path. I want to be my own boss. There's a unique type of person that's attracted to real estate, and they're kind of crazy. We hire the crazy ones, and we hire the best of the crazy, but they're crazy nonetheless because normal people don't choose to go commission only and build something from the ground up. Right away, you are not normal.
Yeah, you are taking a risk, and you're all in on that risk.
And you're our kind of not normal. But recognition or discovery number 1 is that comes at a cost. It comes with certain realities that aren't typical of the rest of society.
Right. And when the other 90% is looking at you and saying, all right, there's something not right here, if they haven't been in those shoes and they don't experience those same experiences, it's a struggle for them to comprehend why the entrepreneurs are so different and what's driving them. And so they start to judge it, and not in a positive way.
You have anything more to say on discovery number 1? You are driven?
No, I think we're good.
So discovery number 2, and this gets kind of big. Yeah. This gets deep.
Yep.
And at face value, it's a small sentence, but once you start digging into it, you realize the depth. Discovery number 2 is that all decisions are made out of fear or love. Do you want to take a stab at what that means?
Yeah. And it's You and I have had conversations about this plenty. And I'm going to give an example first, and then let's dig deeper into it. But you know what, I've got a client, and I'm going to get them a gift, because if I don't, they might see somebody else that gave their client a gift and judge me and say I'm not as good of a realtor because I didn't. Whereas, you know, that's out of fear. They're judging me because I didn't do what someone else did. Out of love is, oh my gosh, I really like this client, and I want to get them a great gift because they mean something to me. And when you look at that, it's a gift, but what was the intention behind it? And then you start expanding on that, and really every decision we make and anything that we do is going to be one or the other. Am I doing this because I'm scared? I'm fearing loss. I'm fearing failure. Or am I doing this because it's really coming from my heart and my soul, and I want to do this because it's part of me?
He called love decisions made from the heart,
right,
where you're actually making them from your true self.
Mm-hmm.
And then decisions made out of fear are decisions made through the mind, and it's ego related.
Yeah.
And I don't know, everyone's got different exposures to ego and mindfulness. But when I think of ego, I think of the outer layers of self that I've had to create in order to defend the little Dylan in me that frankly needs protecting sometimes. And so ego is this manifestation, and true self is who we really are, that frankly most of us have forgotten, or we don't even know ourselves for the most part. So we make decisions out of either fear or love. My first question to you was about your inner drive. Yeah. And we've already kind of touched on this. I will confess that for the vast majority of my life, most of my decisions have been made from a position of fear. It's back to that hypervigilance. It's back to my childhood. And I find that tragic and sad. Mm-hmm. And I feel like for the last decade or so, my journey has been working to shift that. Yeah. Now, I didn't have the language that this book has for it, but it's fundamentally what I've been at work doing. Do you share that sentiment, or is your version slightly different?
No, I don't think it's different. I think that really what we're talking about comes back to that outer world story and that inner world turmoil is that love and fear. But again, it's most of those decisions that I've made have been based around fear of, is somebody not going to like me if I don't do this? And is someone not going to like me if I don't do this for them? And so when it comes back to that whole approach of where am I making my decisions from? Is it from my true self, which, you know, there's lots of names for it. Your soul, your true self, like who you really are, your inner being. Or is it coming from your ego, from your head? And are you analyzing and trying to manipulate the outcome? And when it's fear-based, you are overthinking it, trying to make sure that you're doing what you think others expect of you. And when it's coming from your heart and your soul, it's you're doing what you really want to do because you know it's the best thing to do.
Well, it's interesting the way you describe that. You frame this, and as you should. Mm-hmm. We've all got a different version of this fear. Yours seems to be about pleasing people. And so you said you frame it through what others think. Yeah. I actually couldn't give a rip.
Right, I know.
What other people think. You know what mine is? My fear comes from safety and security. Mm-hmm. And it's, again, got to do with, I didn't always have that as a child. And so mine is about, I need to control, this is what my therapist helped me understand. I need to control my environment in order to feel safe. Yeah. So long as I know where everything is, I'm super organized. So long as I know that all the people around me are good and safe, and I know where they're at, I can have some peace. But it's a superficial peace, right? Because it's a peace. It's kind of like you're at peace when you know everybody likes you. Yeah. Well, that doesn't last very long, right? Because at some point, you're going to have to have a hard conversation. Yeah. Yep. And so your framing is about other people's perspective, very natural. And then mine is about fear of losing control and being unsafe again. Yeah. And I don't know how many other versions of that there are, but I do know that everyone's is slightly different. And I do believe I can confidently say that in most people, what it's got to do is early trauma, early childhood experiences. Divorce is a great example of that. So yeah, would you say yours is predominantly, like you said, you love to win, and I said I hate to lose. Yeah. And I hated this about myself. I resent that about myself. Resent's a big word, but I had swimming peers that literally, like, they just loved the win and they chased the Olympic rings, and I just was always good. And if I didn't win, people would have gone like, "Oh, what happened?" Or if I lost in a race, someone they'd celebrate, "You beat Dylan." And so that was my voice constantly. And so I had to win, because if I didn't win, then I lost. And so it was always the fear of losing. Right. So we're different in that regard. And yet we're both, I guess maybe the question I'm looking for is, despite our differences, would you say you were predominantly, your decisions in your early first 30, whatever years were made out of fear? Or would you say you had a better balance of fear and love? Absolutely
made out of fear. And still something we have to constantly think about in really every decision. It's not easy, but I think it's actually recognizing it is where you start to kind of have some success there, is realizing that if you're making those decisions out of fear, you're leading yourself into a place where you're not going to eventually be at peace. You are going to constantly struggle of worrying about what is my decision going to do. And so I think it's, we were talking about the kind of the hate losing, love winning, but I think you can twist that to really anything when we're talking to our agents, right? There's some agents that get an absolute thrill out of closing a transaction, and it's all about chasing that closing, and they're like, yes, like that's another one, that's a metric that I hit. There's others that all they're worried about is, did I take the very best care of my people that I could? And so there's, we
but
see
even that
this.
could be healthy or unhealthy.
And even that, I was just going to say, can be a different place. That can be out of fear, or that can be out of love. And so I wanted to kind of remind everybody that in everything we do, there's two very unique approaches to this, and they're very different in what they do for us. And
you don't have to say out loud that one is obviously better, and yet it's not the default of humanity.
Right. It's not.
I say this in so many different contexts where we talk about our core values or our winning thoughts, or we are not built to be happy.
Right.
We are built to survive. And so much of our instinctual and biological patterns that are hardwired into our psyche start with scarcity, start with negativity, start with bad as a survival mechanism. And so the problem is, most of life is actually, surviving isn't that hard these days. There's no literal tigers.
No tigers are chasing
us. Look
us.
left, look right before you cross the street. You'll be okay. So, but what we do is we process all of the world's happenings as if they're real tigers. And so have you ever read or heard of a book, The Body Keeps the Score?
And I've heard, you've talked about it, but I've never read it.
And it's not probably for most people to read. It's a little too much. But it's brilliant, and it's set the precedent for, I call it a seminal work for understanding human psychology. But the whole premise is just that going through an actual trauma, something crazy, near-death experience, rape, or pick anything crazy, and reliving it in your memory or reliving a version of it somehow, the impact to you physiologically is almost negligible in terms of the difference. The actual event versus reliving it
and thinking about it.
And so we live in a world where we constantly relive these traumas, and our bodies are subject to all this. And so there's a physicality to this as well, I guess is where I'm going. He gets into this whole energy thing, applied kinesiology. I guess just real quick, I'm curious, what is your sentiment about all that? Do you buy into that? Do you look at that and go, yeah, that's the woo-woo version of this?
So what's funny is I like the woo-woo version of this. I can see a lot of people that are, if they go in and read this, which we obviously want everybody to. Even though this isn't a book talk, book group, we do want people to read this.
We want people to grow. And this is a
great book to do it. And I could, as I was reading it, I was imagining other people reading it and being like, okay, you're going to look at this and think this is a little out there. I can't believe Travis
recommended
right?
this.
Like, why would Travis read
Well, you're
this?
back in your fear there.
Yeah. But I do believe that in what they're talking about there, in this trapped energy, because it's a real thing, and we talk about it. You feel when somebody walks into a room and they're walking in and they're full of positivity, you feel that before they even say a word.
It transfers. It's
100%.
real somehow. We don't know yet how, but I believe it's there.
Yep, it's there. And so it can be a bit much. I want to rewind a little bit though when we're talking about really that mechanism that we have for survival. And because I was actually sitting down talking to an agent about this the other day, because our our default is, well, you know what? Even when I'm making something I'm really excited about, I'm making the decision to do it. My default is, well, what's the worst that could happen? And we use that as a metric. And I said, like, try this for me for just a second. I'm like, tell me what's the best thing that could happen if you do this. And like, oh, and they list off all these things. I'm like, so why are you so worried about the one worst thing when there's all these amazing things that could happen instead? And that's your fear or love, right? If I'm worried about the worst thing that could happen, I am going to focus on that. If I'm thinking about all the amazing things that happen if I make this one change, why wouldn't I be over here? And it's a mindset that we've been trying to protect ourselves for all of history. And when we make that little switch and say, I want the good things, and he talks about this in really in this section when we start talking about energy, and it's the law of attraction. Negativity is going to attract negativity, but those that are expecting a good outcome regularly find good things happening to them. And I think that's a big piece of this love and fear.
Yeah. No, I hate to admit it, but I increasingly, the older I get, and the more I learn about quantum physics and just the nature of reality, the more I buy into the woo-woo energy stuff. We are fundamentally just vibrating particles. And I actually spent some time looking into David Hawkins and applied kinesiology, and some of it is a little out there where like you can move your arm with different, some of it I'm not sure, but this is true of all of life. Like what's true, sometimes we find parts of it, but we don't quite know how to express or manifest it yet, but time tends to reveal the reality of these sorts of things. So there's something going on underneath this at a physiological level. So these habits then, these 10 disciplines, help me understand how you understand they relate to reprogramming your default to fear or love.
Yeah, when I think it's helping you lead into, to be honest with you, that third discovery is that, we are driven, and whether that is from a dark place or not, we can make an assumption that's for most of us it is, that love and fear is going to be the precursor for everything we do, but we have to realize that if we want true happiness, we're going to have to accept the fact that we're different and then apply these different approaches in the disciplines to get us there. And I think that's the important piece of this is we're not ever going to get to the point where every decision is going to be made out of love, right? Like we even if we're overly optimistic that we're going to transform our entire lives and everything we do is going to be out of love, there are going to be decisions that we make.
You're still sitting in this body that's hardwired this way.
And it's a rough world sometimes. And so no matter what, you're still going to do that. And you're still going to walk into a room and you're going to worry, are the people here judging me? And do I need to be worried that maybe they're not on my side? And I think they are. That's going to happen no matter what.
Which maybe, sorry to jump in.
No,
maybe has some valid value as well. I mean, perhaps if we completely only thought about what could be great, maybe we get run over by a truck because we'd forget to look left and right. So these aren't bad things. It's just sad that our default through life has to always be on the negative side. So maybe it's just about finding more balance between the two even.
And we know it's Angela brought it up at Roundtable. We're 7 times more likely to assume the negative.
Yeah.
That's a lot. If I'm going to make 10 decisions and I know that I'm that much more likely to be negative on those 10 decisions, that's a hard thing to work through. It's going to take more effort on my part to approach it from a different mindset than fear.
And that's just the beginning, because then you're surrounded in a world where if it bleeds, it leads. And so all the negative is on the media constantly, negative marketing. And so, and people are around us not super healthy. And so everybody wants to share the negative constantly. Yeah. So we start with a 7 times more likely default, but then we're also saturated in a world with negativity almost intentionally, right? Okay, so you're going into this third discovery. You can be driven and have peace. So give us your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, this is, again, I think this is what leads us into the disciplines more than anything else. I think the first 2 are helping us understand who we are and why we function the way we do. I think the third is the one that, not to sound too, it's the one that gives us hope that we can, as people that are different. And, when we talk about 10% of the population, I would assume it's actually less. I don't know that.
Is that what he said? 10?
He said about 10% of the population is different, is considered driven. I would assume that it's less, because I think even in the real estate industry, we know that there are some people that treat this as a business, and a business that they want to grow to a level that is maybe not even feasible. And we have others that are very complacent and happy, and it's okay. We're not saying that there's something wrong with that, but what we're saying is they might not be driven in the same way that some others are. So maybe it's different levels of what this drive looks like.
Probably a little bit of a spectrum.
Yeah. And look at professional athletes. We can say that yep, any professional basketball player is driven, but they're not Michael Jordan level. And so I think that's the difference in what we kind of see here is that once you accept that and you realize you're different, it's that there are opportunities then to be hopeful that you can find peace with the fact that you're different.
I love what he said. And I think maybe this is an undermining fear of the driven. I'm trying to figure out if it's cognitive or not, though. But what he said was gaining peace does not mean forfeiting impact.
Mm-hmm.
And so the premise there is that, yeah, but like the thing that makes me so effective is that I am constantly freaking on the ball. I'm constantly aware of all these problems, and that's what makes me excellent and obsessed with better. If I become complacent, if I find peace, does it mean that I somehow don't get to be as impactful as I otherwise have been? And that's really what we're saying here, is that there's a version of this where you can have inner peace and still be as impactful. Those two things are not on opposite ends of a pendulum.
Right. And I think that's the concern that people would have is, does that mean I have to let off the throttle? Do I have to?
Because the driven don't want to let
They don't want to let, and that's the most important piece of this is they don't want to let off. They want to continue to excel and do more and be bigger. And it's not about letting off that throttle. It's making sure that as you are pushing down on that throttle, you're also taking care of everybody else that's in that car. And I think that's the important piece.
You know what I just realized is I think that's got to do with that you cannot simply remove the driving force. You have to replace it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why exchanging the fear-based motivator, a lot of them, as he mapped it out, really has a correlating love alternative, love-based alternative. And so the driven are going to remain driven, but they're going to need a replacement for the fear-based fuel.
Right.
And in every one of these motivators, there is a version that's significantly not just more healthy, but frankly more enjoyable and beautiful.
Yeah, it's what you would want, and I think that's what every one of our entrepreneurs are chasing is what is this happiness and what is this level that I want to get to. It's hidden, but it really is just it's joy and it's happiness, and how do I get there? And we think that doing more, being better is what's going to get us there, and sometimes that's true. But we have to realize that it doesn't need to come from that place of fear that we talked about at the beginning.
Man, you weren't in the staff meeting yesterday, but Stacy, we were talking about humble, hungry, smart, and Stacy asked just a great question about contentment and how that relates to hunger. Hunger being one of the attributes we're looking for in people we hire. It's almost like the lie is that contentment and hungry, or hunger, in this case, driven is the word that he's using, are somehow antitheses to each other.
Right.
But the truth is there can be contentment in hunger, in driven.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I ultimately am seeking.
Yeah.
Because I know that there's no version of me that's ever going to be happy sitting still.
Right.
And, I talk about buying a van and driving around the mountains and just sitting around looking at sunsets, but I would die inside if that's all I got to do.
Right.
Or sitting on a beach, or you name it, because I'm weird and I'm driven. But man, Travis, I'm also tired, and I desire to be working as fast and furious as I am, but from a position of love, from a position of contentment. And so I think that's a revelation I'm having right now: is contentment and driven or hungry are not on opposite sides of anything.
And that's what I think most people would imagine, that if you are content, you're on this side of the spectrum, but if you're driven, you're on the other. And I think what the whole piece of that Discovery 3 is that these should be happening at the exact same time.
Yeah.
If we can be content but still driven, we're continuing to improve ourselves, but we're doing it from a place of realizing that we're special. And it's not just that we're different and we're weird, it's that we're special. And I think that's a big piece.
Yeah. Special.
We are special.
Okay, I want to read these 10 disciplines real quick. This is where we're headed for the rest of this journey. and I haven't got it all mapped out. I feel like it's just blazing a trail a little bit, but I'm excited to go have organic conversations with our people about, I'm going to call them habits or disciplines. And what I'm curious about from you as I read through these is I have found that I've actually been on a journey of working on these things. I didn't know it.
Right.
But these are all areas that I've actually been making progress on in order to find peace. And I'm just curious on your perspective on that as well. So the 10 disciplines, very briefly, are first to shift short-term thinking for long-term thinking. He calls it developing a 10-year thinking. Number 2, taking time off. 3, knowing thyself. 4, be still. That's going to be an interesting one for me. Number 5 is know your 100%. 6 is say no often. Number 7, I wrote $15 an hour work. He wrote 25, I think, in the book. I'm like, this guy must live in California. Prepare every night. And then put everything in one place. I can't wait to get to that one because I've worked so hard to be systematic about that. And then finally, be humble. As your personal journey, have you seen that of these areas that you've had to work on to find peace? How do these relate to
and that's what was really unique is you obviously were the one that recommended this book to me just a few months ago, leading up to Roundtable. You're like, you know what, if we're going to talk about 3 books, like this is one we need to talk about. And as I got to the 10 disciplines, I'm like, this is stuff that I've been trying to do over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, when I realized that if I'm going to be happy, or if I'm going to be content, I'm going to have to do some of these things because they weren't part of my life. Putting everything in one place. I'm notorious for having sticky notes in 10 different areas. And so my wife's like, hey, you're going to use a Remarkable, and everything that you write down is going to be right there. I know you do the same thing with a notebook. It's all going to be in one place so that all of my ideas are together. And I'm not trying to think, where did I write that down? What was that idea I had? So it's just little pieces of this, but they can be expounded.
Stick on that one for me, because it's a great example of what I'm struggling with in my head. When I first read this book, I was like, wait, this is so deep. You're driven, decisions made of fear, out of love. The whole world's made of energy, and you can find peace. I'm like, okay, whoa, bring it. And then he goes, here's 10 stupid little things that you can do. So you mentioned put everything in one place, and we'll get to this topic. My first read was, well, how on earth is that going to solve the world's problems?
But that's what's really funny is when you told me to read this book, you're like, in the first part of it, the 3 discoveries is really good. Then he gets into the 10 disciplines, and he's like,
that's what I said to you.
Yeah, you're like, they're there, but they're really nothing special. And I get to the 10 disciplines, I'm like, I'm excited to talk about this with you because these little things make such a huge difference. And so we were sitting in a team meeting, and I'm like, hey guys, here's the 10 disciplines. I want you to pick one. So this was an online team meeting, and I want you to implement that. And we're going to check in every few weeks to see how it's going. And it's been fun listening to people be proud of, you know what, every night I'm getting ready for the next day. So my clothes are out, my clothes are ready. I know what my lunch is going to be. And people are realizing that they wake up in the morning, their day's already starting better. And they're not spending that brain power early in the morning of how I get things ready. And it seems small and it seems trivial, but when you look at how these 10 things can compound, it can be huge changes by making little changes. And I think that's what our people are going to be excited about. It's like, well, I can do this, right? If you told me I needed to go out and I needed to meditate for 2 hours every day, I'm like, I don't have time for it. But you're telling me to go be still for 5 or 10 minutes a day by myself and just chill. Like, I can do 5 or 10 minutes. And so as we work through these, I think it's going to be really exciting for our people to see they're easy to put into place.
Yes. And I think that's what I hope everyone can see, is that these are ridiculously simple and yet unbelievably profound. And I have worked on every single one of them. It sounds like you have too. And so, I'm just excited and ready for this journey. And maybe on the back end of it, I'll solve all my problems.
I'm going to go ahead and assume no.
No.
And I think that's the other piece to keep in mind here, is that this is all about a journey.
Yes.
And I think that's the big piece of this is like doing these things, you are going to shine, right? Your life is going to be better, but it's not going to be perfect. And there are going to be times that you find yourself working from that dark place. And it's the recognition of it is more important than anything else, of knowing that that's what's driving sometimes.
Really good stuff. It was fun hearing you just teach through this briefly. It was very condensed.
Well, and it's funny. I was telling Stacy about this morning. So you had mentioned, you're like, you know what, we could just do the whole roundtable just on this one book. And I could see your excitement about this book. And so I intentionally kept it very brief and condensed during roundtable because I had a feeling we were going to go deeper with it. And I was telling Stacy about that this morning. And this is exactly what I would have imagined, that we look at something like this and we're like, hey, like we talked about it briefly, but we also realize now that this is more than just an hour talk. This is something that we need to actually live. And I think it's going to be exciting here what our people get to see over the course of the next couple months.
Yeah, what makes me proud about this is we sell houses for a living, and we also coach real estate agents to build better businesses, and those are beautiful things, and we love what we do. Mm-hmm. Underneath all that, there's just a fun passion to want to help people. Well, how do we say it? Be liberated and empowered. It's
to have a better life. Like,
yes.
How can we make your life better? And this is one of those things that it seems so odd to be talking about how a book can make your life better, and hearing us talk about it can make your life better, but it's an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and it's a worthwhile pursuit. So appreciate all your insights. Yeah. This was really fun and good stuff. And maybe on the back end of these 10 upcoming conversations, we need to regroup and see what we learned together.
I think so.
Good stuff. Thanks again.
Thank you for joining us today. For more episodes, resources, and show notes, head to morethanmorepodcast.com.